and we will give you a chance to participate in this matter. So having said that, I will call the meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council to order. It is June 17, 2020. It is 12:30.
Schember.
Present tonight.
Stephenson. Swanson. Tolbert. Ulrich.
Present and aye.
Winschittel.
Present, aye.
Washi. Okay, and then a motion and a second, Chair.
All right, thank you, Jenna. I'm just looking at the agenda and wondering, is there anyone on the line from the public that wants to address the tab in any manner? We'll call this the public comment portion of the agenda. Okay. We're going to move on to reports. The chair's report. We don't have, well, let me back up. From time to time in the past, we have had a month off in the summertime from a meeting. Sometimes it's been July, sometimes it's been August, and Elaine tells us at the exec committee that we don't have any business for July, so there will be no meeting planned for July 2020. You will be able to do something else with your time on a Wednesday in mid-July. So we will reconvene in August. That's one piece of important information I wanted to talk about. Otherwise, from the tab exec committee meeting, I can tell you that we talked mostly about the future information items that we thought would be important to be addressing with the full tab. And I would like full tab participation on this as well. If you have ideas on topics that you'd like to receive information on, please let us know. Elaine's got a full list of potential future information items that she can share with the full tab. We concentrated, I think, today at the exec meeting, talking primarily about in the context of COVID-19, keeping people safe, the interface between public health and public transportation. Deb Barber reported out that we're back to 65% usage levels on public transportation, and some of that is purposeful in terms of keeping proper social distancing. But we do think that the future of public transportation as it interfaces with public health and also equity is something that we want to be talking about. We also discussed that in the context of our post George Floyd world, I would say let me put it this way, the urgency around having some of those community conversations that we talked about having when we had the last regional solicitation. We talked about enhancing the equity portion of the scoring, and we really didn't have a sense of what people in concentrated areas of poverty were needing in terms of transportation, whether it might be transit, bike ped, roadway improvements. And so we had talked about having, I'll call them small town hall meetings or community conversations in North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, and also in St. Paul, in light of the fact that there's been 1,500 buildings damaged in these areas and people are having a difficult time, more and more difficult time making ends meet. It seems like there's some urgency to this. But with COVID-19, how do you go about having a town hall meeting? And so we're thinking about the possible ways we could do it electronically or with a call-in number that would give folks a chance to be able to participate. So stay tuned on that. And I think those were the primary areas of conversation for the TAB exec. And then I've been asked by Todd Bewan to give a quick update for MPCA. So I'll move on to that. And he wanted to give us a VW settlement update. And the first point he wanted me to stress.
Okay, so it's nothing to worry about. You're not sick,
Okay.
so you just have a rash. So it's nothing to worry about, but,
Who's ever calling in on 5781, put yourself on mute. All right, thank you. The VW settlement update. The 1,110 miles of electric vehicle corridors from VW Phase 1 monies are estimated to be completed by September of 2020, so that's good news. And then an additional 2,540 miles of EV charging corridors have been proposed in the VW Phase 2 plan. And Phase 2 would run from 2020 to 2023. The grant's expected to open, this grant is expected to open this summer and will focus on travel across greater Minnesota. The maps of the corridors are available in the VW Phase 2 plan, and installation of all chargers is expected to occur in 2023, or actually by 2023. And you can find more information on this at pca.state.mn.us, and then there's an elaborate way to get to all that information. And I can have Elaine send that notification out so you've got the link if you want to take a look at it. And what this will amount to at the end of the day is an estimated 21 fast charging stations added in Phase 1 and an additional 42 charging stations added in Phase 2. And to locate those charging stations, Todd says the best tool to look at is, this will be an easy one for all of you to jot down, www.plugshare.com, www.plugshare.com. So that's the update report from MPCA. And the next agency report is from the MAC. Is Carl Crimmins on the call? All right, it would have been nice to have, and Bridget Rice, is she on the call by any chance? All right, we'll have to pass on the MAC update. It was good to see some information from Delta about people starting to fly a little bit again. Thanks, Chris, for that chat note. And then we'll move on to MnDOT. Is an agency report there prepared to be given from MnDOT?
Good afternoon, Chair. This is Sheila Cuppy from MnDOT. Mike was unable to attend the first part of the meeting, so I am here tonight. Some of the things he'd like me to highlight is we are continuing with construction projects. We are still happily having reduction in the number of motorists on the roadway. So that's helping with our construction projects happily moving along. We do have a continue to see a drop statewide. We've had some of the projects were temporarily put on hold when the civil unrest was occurring, just because of the nature of where the projects were located. But in general, we continue to do work throughout the past month here. Our fiscal impacts related to the COVID and the less traveling, we don't have any updates on that. We promised that we would be doing an update and a review of those revenues coming in September. One of the things that he was asking for me to ask too is have we heard anything from the cities and counties if they've had a reduction in the amount of funding that related to the downturn in the amount of money coming in, so that fiscal impact is. Other than that, we are again continuing to move along. Happy to have conversations, as you mentioned, related to listening sessions. We at MnDOT are doing the same. Lots of people in lots of different places as we think about the racial inequities and equity in our transportation system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for MnDOT? All right, thank you for that update. And then Deb Barber, Met Council update, please. And you can maybe bring people up to speed on some of the transportation issues we talked about at the exec committee.
Sure. So thank you, Chair. So first thing I wanted to chat a little bit about is obviously during the period of time after the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed, we had to shut down our transit system. We shut down for a total of 5 days. We've been able to bring everything back online now, and we're back to the same levels as we were. One of the big things that I think, a couple of things. One thing we were able to continue to help move our essential workers around during that time frame, utilizing some of our Metmo operators and things like that to be able to continue to get the essential workers where they needed to be. And then the other thing that I wanted to share about that was I was so impressed with hearing some of the stories of after we got our service back up and running. There was such appreciation from our riders for the operators that some of our operators expressed that really was some of their favorite time out operating our bus and train systems, because the riders really were appreciative of what we brought to them, and so it was a very good thing for them. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is we are doing some restructuring of how we're looking at doing our service improvement plan going forward. So we had talked several times here about Network Next.
I didn't have to.
We're going to take Network Next and extend it really over into 2021 because it just makes a lot more sense. That said, one of the things, as you know, we have the regional solicitation and the money set aside for an ABRT. So we've now decoupled those two things. So the ABRT prioritization will still occur, and that will still come back to TAB and to the Transportation Committee. We're still working on some of the timing, but we don't want to do the full service planning with such a unknown landscape, both from the public health perspective, but also from how we want to revision our system as we expand after this. And so I think it's a good opportunity to really, we had two different efforts with this.
All right, we might have lost, we lost Deb's audio and video.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
this is Nick Thompson. I can finish, I think, Deb's statement there. If you didn't notice, Deb was traveling across North Dakota, so.
Yeah.
Are you back, Deb?
I'm back, but you go ahead. Yeah, sorry, I'm glitching in and out a little bit.
Yeah, so we will be bringing the ABRT priorities back so that can be part of the regional solicitation. And then rethinking our network next so that we can incorporate the changes that have occurred and get good public input into that process. And there was clear need to kind of slow that process down and reflect the changes. And so that they've started to take two separate paths, but want to assure Tab that we will get the ABRT priority completed so that it can pick the next project that is part of the regional solicitation.
all right. Thank you. Questions for Member Barber? Yes, Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was looking at you head on for a split second. I thought you had a haircut, a radical haircut, but then I saw your ponytail.
Yeah, it's just my bangs are a little out of control. So I have a question, and I understand there might not be an answer for this yet, but there's been a lot of conversation around turning 38th in Chicago into some kind of permanent memorial, which would conflict, it's the D line. So I'm just wondering if Metro Transit and the Met Council is starting to have those conversations about opportunities.
I would say I don't think we've necessarily had those conversations yet, but clearly there are stations in that area, especially with as we're looking at the D line and B line. And I think that is certainly something as we vision out how and do some of that community outreach in those areas of what we want those spaces to look like, that I think that's certainly something we want to make sure we're connecting with the community about. So I don't have an answer for you yet, but I would say hopefully we get our funding for the ABRTs and we can go out and have some of those conversations. That's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a real interesting question. Commissioner McGuire?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and great to see you, Deb. Be safe. I think you are being safe since you're not driving. Anyway, just curious about how, if you could remind us, how is it going with the Metro Transit bus service? If I know, are you still staying at reduced capacity? So, like, if too many people want to get on the bus, you just have them wait for the next bus. Is that happening? Are there people monitoring the buses, or how? Could you just talk a little bit about how that's all going?
Sure, that is still happening because we still have social distancing requirements. Like, we want to make sure that, so what we're doing is so our busier routes, we put the bigger buses out on, and then, or we put, or run service more frequently. A message will get flashed on the bus if the next bus is getting called up. So an operator will call to whoever's behind if they have to pass somebody by. So it's sort of some real-time communication to be able to do that. But we're also doing some things like now we've made face masks mandatory, some of those other things. And so the combination between all of it is we're trying to give at least the safest environment that we can. We do know that, especially on some of our routes, they are getting full, which is because there are transit-dependent people in some of our busier corridors. And so we've had to do that, but I think we've been pretty mindful about how we're doing that.
Mr. Chair,
yes.
Could I ask one more question? Thank you, Mr. Chair. So are you providing masks then, or if you're requiring them, are you providing them at the buses too, or how is that working? Just
we're not at this point. It's a good question, but it has a lot to do right now with availability. I think it's something that clearly we're not enforcing anything. But we are trying to set the standard of that's the expectations right now if you're out on the transit system.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the availability of the masks being an issue for sure. Okay, thanks.
Okay, say as a segue on the commissioner's question, Deb, and incidentally, I know North Dakota from growing up there, it's the only place you can drive on the interstate highway system and you don't even have to look at the road. In fact, you could read the newspaper too if you wanted to and talk to us at the same time. So I'm wondering if you did have masks available, Would you be able to accommodate having those on some of those busier routes? Available supply on the bus itself? Lost her. Again, Nick?
Mr. Chair, for the in terms of masks, we've had a hard time getting masks, but in the past couple of weeks, the procurement schedule or the sourcing has been getting a little better. We have handed out some masks to each driver, I think up to 25, and they have some that they could hand out voluntarily. But there's some challenges with the number of masks we would need to hand out. They have some to hand out if possible or if needed.
Okay, the reason I asked that question is because I got a note from the U.S. Conference of Mayors that I could get 4,000 masks, and I was going to have the city manager order them, and I don't know if he did or not, but I could. Would that help you? We could ship them over to Metro Transit.
I think now that the supply chains are working again, we're okay. We just couldn't get any 2 weeks ago, and as of this morning, we had a good supply of them. So we thanks for the offer, but I'm not sure we need them at this point.
Okay, all right. Deb, you're back now. Deb Barber, we can see you. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, this is Member Narayanan. I have a question or
Yes.
comment, really.
Yes, go ahead.
There's been a lot of fear about transmission of COVID-19 from public transit, and I've, in the last couple of days, been seeing a lot of reports that say that some of those fears may be a little bit overblown, especially if people wear masks on public transit and if they do maintain social distancing. I think this is really heartening for us, those of us who are worried about public transit systems being, considered infected or places of infection. So I really feel like this is something that we should be considering as we move forward and actually not worry too much about encouraging people to ride public transit going forward as well.
All right, thank you for that comment. Ms. Foster, did you have any follow-on? Member Foster, anything? Okay.
I don't. Thank you.
All right, very good. And that completes our agency reports. And our Lisa Freeze, do you have any TAC report you want to make, or do you want to hold off?
Mr. Chair, I think Carl Crimmins is here. Did you want him to give a report?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I did see that chat note come up earlier. Carl, welcome. Member Crimmins.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine. Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, the things are picking up at the airport. Flights have gone up daily. We've gone up 14 flights a day. And by next month, they expect the flights to go up another 100 flights a day. So things are gradually picking up. And they think by August, we'll be up to about 250 flights daily. And TSA is putting on more help. They're adding more security lines because the passenger traffic is picking up. And then we're working with concessionaires to bring them back online at the airport as traffic through the airport picks up, passenger traffic. And there's still plenty of parking, so you don't have to worry about that. You'll be almost guaranteed a parking spot if you go. But at least things are on the upswing. Things look like they bottomed out in April, and now May and June, things are starting to rise up. That's about all here.
Yeah. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Say, thanks, Carl. I'm just curious if the airlines are still doing or I think some of them were allowing you to call ahead and see how full the plane was. Are any airlines still doing that? And I've just heard from people that have recently flown that the flights have been packed, without social distancing, which I'm just stunned at, actually. But I'm just curious if you have a sense of that. If I know there's more flights and everything, but are the flights flying full or are they flying without the middle seat? Just curious.
Well, we had a meeting yesterday with Monday with Delta Airlines and Sun Country, and Delta, is about 70% of the air traffic out of MSP, and they are still requiring masks of passengers as well as workers, and they're not renting out the middle seats. They are going to keep the middle seats empty, and they think they're going to fly their planes mostly at 60% capacity.
Okay.
And Sun Country is not letting you reserve the middle seat online, but they're not guaranteeing that the middle seat won't be sold either at the airport or through a travel agency or something like that. But they're also requesting that masks are worn in the airport, at the gate, and on the plane. And service, Delta's going to load their planes from the back to the front. So the people in the last rows will board first. And service, as bad as it is, I shouldn't say as bad as it is, but as infrequent as it is in coach, it's going to be just a little bag with a drink and a snack. And it'll be just hand delivered to every passenger. So they're going to limit the amount of contact between the airline attendants and the passengers. But that's from Delta and from Sun Country. And both of those airlines are speaking of traffic picking up. Sun Country is starting to fly to Mexico. They've added a couple destinations, and Delta has added a couple international destinations. So they're starting to increase traffic also. And that's the only two airlines that I've had conversations with.
And I should say, Mr. Chair, that the people that were flying in on full flights were not on a Delta or a Sun Country flight, but there are airlines that are flying at full capacity, which is amazing. But thank you, Carl, for that.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair?
Member Crimmins, oh, somebody else had a question.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Stan Karwoski. Carol, good comments on the changes and what you think the airlines are doing. I've always been frustrated with TSA and the serpentine lines and like at 5 a.m, it's like the airport knows there's going to be a lot of flights leaving at once. So with that said, is there anything being done on those TSA security lines for separation and more staffing or more points of getting through security? I think there's opportunities for great improvement regardless of COVID, just for the airline industry. You got any comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We had a graph from TSA delivered to our board meeting, and they're also going to have 6 feet distance between the serpentines. Every time the serpentine line turns, they're going to have like every other serpentine line is going to be closed. So you're going to be distanced horizontally instead of vertically. Vertically, you have to take care of yourself, but they are going to try to keep the serpentine line separated more. A lot of the construction on the south side has been completed, so a lot of those temporary walls are down. So that gives us a little more room to spread the lines out as they serpentine. So they have taken that into account. And all the TSA agents are masked and they have plexiglass. We've been putting plexiglass barriers up at all the stations where you check in, and all the gates have plexiglass barriers up now between you and the workers. So, and then every airport worker is required to wear a mask when they're facing the public. If they can't keep distance, they're required to wear a mask. I think we received 1 million masks from the FAA, and they've been passing those out to the reliever airports as well as to the T1 and T2 terminals. And then I have heard a story about United Airlines that they're requiring masks to board the plane. They said that once they're on the plane, they're not requiring you to wear a mask.
Okay.
And I asked Sun Country and Delta both, what's the recourse for a flight attendant if a passenger refuses to keep the mask on in the airplane? And they didn't have any answer to that. They're relying on humanity to take care of that, or maybe embarrassment or some kind of, culture shock that you would keep your mask on while you're flying. But other than that, right now, there's no rules, there's no punishment if you take your mask off while you're on the airplane.
Wow.
Well, those are some good TSA changes, but I hope you could do something to handle the higher volume because it's just an opportunity. So it's another discussion for another day. Thank you.
All righty.
One more question. Member Crimmins says, you mentioned that they're heading towards 250 flights a day. Before COVID, what were the average number of flights per day out of into and out of MSP?
It was 355 a day. We had 355 daily flights. We're down to 134, and they hope to get up to about 230 by August.
Okay. All right. Very
But
good.
again, remember, Mr. Chair, that they're going to be flying at 60% capacity.
Sure.
So
it's still a long road ahead.
yeah, they're talking 2022.
Okay. Yeah, Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Member Crimmins, I do have is someone like holding the airlines accountable to not flying full flights? Or are they like sort of on goodwill?
Couldn't hear that. I couldn't hear that, Member Foster.
Sure.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, thank you. Is someone like in the MAC or I guess other body holding the airlines accountable to not flying full flights, or is that sort of a goodwill thing on their?
Oh, that would be a business decision on each separate airline. Maybe the FAA might have authority to impose some kind of regulation. I was hoping the FAA would impose the regulation that you have to wear a mask at all times on the plane. And I even asked that they would bar a passenger from flying again if they remove their mask while they're in flight. It would be easy enough to get their name and address and everything else and just tell them you can't fly. That's it. If you're not going to wear the mask, you can't fly. But they said they naturally, from a marketing standpoint, I don't think they want to go that far. But yeah, that would be an FAA situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And then we've got to go back. Member Sanger had a question for Deb Barber. Is Deb still on? Maybe for Nick.
Yep, I'm still on, if you can hear me.
You can.
Okay.
So Sue is muted right now, so she'd have to unmute herself.
Yeah, Member Sanger, you're muted. You're still muted. Yeah, I wonder if we've lost her.
Greg, can you try to unmute Sue, please? Thank you.
All right, hold on. Well, as soon as she comes back, we'll deal with that. Let's move on.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. So we've got well, Lisa Freeze. Did Lisa want to report out anything?
Mr. Chair, I'll be impersonating Lisa Freeze today.
Oh, Mr. Isaacson, Member Isaacson, welcome.
I don't have any TAC report other than to say that there's 2 items in front of you today. So, and I believe those are business items that'll come forward momentarily. Right?
Okay. All right, thank you. Let's move on to the business portion of the agenda. And we've got some consent agenda items. We've got both the minutes and then a streamlined tip amendment that involves adds the purchase of right of way with federal funds to a project up in Anoka County. And we can handle those in a single motion.
Move approval, Mr. Chair. Heyman Roland, move approval.
All right.
I'll second for Mayor Bailey.
All right, thank you, Mayor Bailey. We've got a motion and a second to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further discussion? Somebody say something? Okay. Roll call, please, Jenna.
Anderson,
Aye.
Bailey,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Copy,
Aye.
Boyles,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Gattell,
Aye.
Heyman Roland,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Aye.
Collinshead,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Lindeke,
Aye.
Look,
Aye.
Malichnik,
Aye.
McGuire,
Aye. Aye.
Narayanan,
Aye.
Petrick,
Aye.
Aye.
Reich,
Aye.
Sanger,
Aye.
Schember, Stephenson, Swanson, Tolbert. Chris, are you there? Ulrich,
Aye.
Winchell.
Aye.
And for the record, Chair, Tolbert was present and voted on our roll call and approval of the agenda.
All right, thank you, Jenna. The consent motion passes. Both items are approved. 2020-25 is adopted. Commissioner Look, you got a nice project up there. So it's good we got that done.
Thank you.
Yes. Any comment?
None at this time.
All right, thank you. Non-consent items on the agenda. We've got one matter, 2020-24. Brian Isaacson's here, the Assistant TAC Chair, and then I think Joe Barbeau is going to do the main presentation. And then we've got two informational items to deal with. And so, Mr. Isaacson, I don't know if you want to introduce it or you want to go right to Joe Barbeau.
Yeah, it'll be a short intro. So every year we go through this process. As the tip is developed, the draft tip comes to this board and you release it for public comment. And then later on in the summer, once you've received the comments, then you're approving it for printing and approval as the actual program for people to work from. And so I believe Joe is here to give us a presentation on the details of the proposed tip that will be released for public comment here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Isaacson.
Thanks, Brian and Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm here to talk a little bit about the 2021 to 2024 tip. Most of you have seen variations of this presentation in the past. I'm sure that a couple of you have not. So if I do gloss over or skip over something that you're not sure about, feel free to pause me and ask me a question. So this is my first time presenting a tab in this format, I guess. Next slide. Thank you. So in brief, a TIP is a 4-year list of transportation projects funded in whole or in part with federal funding. The TIP exists, or this requirement exists, so that regional bodies like the council can have a role in programming the projects in the larger metropolitan areas. So all projects funded with federal funds or any projects that are considered regionally significant, i.e. affecting air quality, are by rule included to be in the, are required to be in the TIP. MnDOT actually does provide most of our projects, along with Metro Transit providing a lot of our projects. And MnDOT provides projects that are not federally funded. They provide their own state funded projects, and that's above and beyond It's not federally required, but it's a nice thing that we have in there. And then after our TIP is approved, it gets incorporated into the statewide transportation improvement program, which is meant to reflect directly in this 7-county area the projects that we have in the TIP. And in order for a project to receive federal money, it must be in the STIP. Next. So here's the schedule. It pretty much reflects what the schedule we've had for the last few years. Today, which is the 17th and not the 18th, like the slide shows, today you're approving it for release for public comment, which will be starting on June 22nd and runs through August 6th. It's actually going to run through August 10th because there was sort of a typo in the newspaper notice, but that's okay. It's going to go 4 days longer. So over the course of the summer, there'll be public comments, and it'll be back to this body on August 19th. And then Transportation Committee and Metropolitan Council will approve the item in September 23. There's also going to be a public meeting. Last year, we actually went out and had a drop-in meeting near the Stone Arch Bridge, and we were going to do something similar in maybe another location this year before the COVID issue came out. So it's actually going to be an online meeting on July 13th in concert with the Transportation Committee meeting. So we'll see how that goes. I'll have a presentation like this and maybe add some more slides about particular projects, and the public will be invited and able to participate if they want. And so after we approve, the council approves the TIP in September, MnDOT includes it in the STIP, and then we wait federal approval, which usually happens around November 1st. But last year it went a little bit later, so I'm not exactly sure of when that's going to be. So November, December of 2020. Next slide. So here's a little summary of the funding in there. Last year, the TIP was about $5.1 billion. And I think the reason it's a little bit lower this year is last year we had a number of projects that had come through larger programs like the name's escaping me, Corridors of Commerce, things like that. So this year, we're a little bit lower than last year. And you'll see a lot of local funding that makes up the plurality of the funding, along with highway and transit funds. Those transit funds are almost as big as highway funds. It's related a lot to the larger scale transit projects that you'll see in there. Next. So a little bit about transit in the TIP. In previous years, we've had a presentation from Metro Transit that talks about how we get transit projects end up in the TIP. And we've also had a presentation from MnDOT about highway projects. We actually have put that onto a sheet that on a couple of handouts that make up the first 6 or so pages of the handout that was attached to the agenda. But I'll tell you briefly that the TIP shows only projects funded with federal funds. It doesn't show locally funded projects like we see in the TIP from MnDOT. It shows the projects we fund through the regional solicitation, obviously, because that is a federal fund. And then FTA and DOT competitive grants, because those are federal funding, and then new starts and small starts, obviously federal funds, and those tend to fund like I said, the larger scale projects like ABRTs and gold mine and things of that nature. Next. And that's all I have. If you have any questions about the process or the TIP itself or a project on page A36, let me know. Otherwise, that's all I have, and we'll see you in August.
All right. Questions for Mr. Barbault relative to the recommendation to release the draft TIP for public comment? All right.
Mr. Chair, thank you for
Commissioner
that.
McGuire, you care to move the matter?
Sure. Let me see. Did I unmute? Yeah. Thanks, Joe, for this, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So is there only just one opportunity for the public to weigh in on this? Is that they can weigh in at all they want online and everything, but just one sort of public opportunity? And I'm not suggesting you do any in-person ones, but it seems like we could maybe do one more than one, electronic call if they can't make that one. I'm just curious if you've thought about that, just to make sure we get enough public input.
Thanks, member. And Mr. Chair, this is a fairly new process for us. We did have the one meeting last year, and we did have some input. To be frank, it's difficult to get a lot of input on the tip. That's something that I'll bring over my head to Amy and Nick. But generally, we were content to have one. We could have more than one if we wanted to, or we could see what the attendance is like, or if there's any comment from people that, yeah, I'd like to attend, but I can't be there. And yes, there's a consistent from June 20th to August 6th opportunity to reply by email or phone or written. But it's something we could consider. I don't anticipate a lot of demand for that, and I don't want to downplay the importance, but it's the tip can be a hard sell to get the public pumped up as opposed to say the TPP.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thanks.
Other questions for Mr. Barbeau? Comments?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
Joe, and this is maybe because I'm new, but I don't fully understand how the TIP interacts with the regional solicitation process. Is it that only if the projects go through the regional solicitation do they actually end up in the TIP? Does it apply to all projects?
Thanks, member and Mr. Chair. Any project that receives federal funding goes into the TIP, and that includes the regional solicitation. If I recall, the regional solicitation makes up about 15% of the federal funding in the TIP. So it goes well beyond the solicitation itself. But the regional solicitation, by definition, is federal funding. So the solicitation ends up in the TIP, but any project that receives federal funding needs to be in the TIP.
All right. Other questions for Mr. Barbeau? That was a good question on the interface between the regional solicitation and the TIP. All right. Is there a motion to recommend to the Met Council the release of the draft 2021 through 2024 Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP program, for public comment?
Move approval, Mr. Chair. Mayor
Thank
Mary.
you, Mayor.
Second, Commissioner Gotel.
All right, second, Commissioner Gotel. Any further discussion with regard to the prospective release of the draft TIP? Or the recommendation to have it released? All right, Jenna, roll call, please.
Anderson,
Aye.
Bailey,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Cowpy. Sheila, are you there?
This is Mike Barnes. I'm on, so I can take the vote then.
Mike, you're on. Thanks. Boyles,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye. Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Juliana Stevens,
Aye.
Gotel,
Aye.
Heyman Roland,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Aye.
Hollinshed,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Lindeke,
Aye.
Look,
Aye.
Milichnik,
Aye.
McGuire,
Aye.
Naryanan,
Aye.
Petrick,
Aye.
Wright,
Aye.
Sanger, Schember,
Aye.
Stephenson, Swanson, Tolbert, Ulrich,
Aye.
Winchell,
Aye.
Washi. Chair, the roll has been called. I'm sorry, the
Thank you. Motion passes. We can hear somebody typing on their keyboard. You would stay on mute. That would be good, unless you're speaking. All right, we've got two information items. Thank you, Member Lindeke. And we've got Tony Fisher and Michael Corbett with us to talk about the freeway system interchange study. for a few minutes. Mr. Fisher, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Tony Fisher. I'm a highway planner at the Met Council. This is a study that was a joint effort by MnDOT and the council. Unfortunately, my counterpart at MnDOT is on vacation this week and won't be able to join us.
Your microphone isn't very good,
Sorry.
Mr. Fisher. If you could hold it closer.
Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Unfortunately, Michael Corbett at MnDOT couldn't join us, but this was a joint study by MnDOT and the Met Council. Next slide, please. So this is a type of study we've done before where we take a bucket of investments and try to prioritize within that bucket. The other buckets you've heard of are the MinPass bucket, the CMSP bucket, low cost, high benefit type improvements.
Your microphone is slipping away again, Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Chair, sorry. This is a similar in format study to ones we've done before where we take a bucket of investments and prioritize within that bucket like MinPass or CMSP. This study focused on system interchanges where at least two freeways meet. In the past, these locations have been evaluated independently for benefits and costs and impacts. And we wanted to tackle these more systematically at a regional level to understand what the best opportunities were going to be. And of course, the problems that the study was focused on were centered around congestion and crashes. As you can imagine, there are quite a few needs out in the region, and it was important to sort through those. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the purpose of the study is to reduce crashes and congestion. We wanted to do this in a systematic way to really prioritize those opportunities. We wanted to specifically also consider the usage of freight and transit. And we wanted to build our solutions from the ground up, really looking for those lower cost opportunities that allow us to get at more problems and spread those benefits throughout the region. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the type of improvement this study would have concerned itself with had it not already been funded through Quarters of Commerce. This is 35W at 494. A flyover in the north, from the north to west direction has been funded. You can see that the northeast loop has been removed and replaced by that directional ramp. In this case, it was funded at $70 million and includes grade separated crossing of the exit to Penn Avenue seen here on the left, and a grade separated crossing of one of the ramps from 82nd that's not seen south of this image. This also brings up the type of engagement that can be done at a project level. So in this case, there have been direct communication with businesses, direct communication with residents, targeted communication with underserved communities. Next slide, please. And this is the type of engagement that we are able to do on a regional study where it's harder to get the public excited about these types of studies. So we did have a technical advisory committee where we had a representative from each of the 7 metro area counties. We had a representative from Wright and Sherburne counties, local governments, the Federal Highway Administration, and of course, MnDOT and the council had staff represented on this technical advisory committee. We were at a number of committees, transportation-related committees throughout the region, both early on in the study and more recently. This study was in front of TAB in March of 2019, and now we're back with a summary of the results of the study. So this list includes the Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee. This study was in front of the Transportation Committee a week and a half ago, and it will go to the Funding and Programming Committee tomorrow. Next slide, please. So the study was broken down into 5 phases. That first column represents the first phase where the universe of these interchanges was defined, where 2 freeways cross. The second phase really used 5 performance measures to prioritize the locations for the study to really focus the resources in the right places. The third phase was about understanding those prioritized locations to really understand whether the bottleneck, the problem being caused was related to the interchange design itself, or if it was related to mainline capacity or downstream bottlenecks. That wasn't what the study was focused on, so those were removed from the list. In phase 4, we did develop a number of solutions at these prioritized locations. We estimated the benefits and cost, and from that, a return period to be able to prioritize these. In the fifth phase, we just tried to layer on a little bit more information about preservation improvements that were planned because of the importance of coordinating with that type of work. Next slide, please. So here in phase one, as I mentioned, we defined the study interchanges. Next slide. So these were the 56 interchanges that the study focused on. We started with a longer list, but narrowed it down to where two freeways crossed. Originally, the list included where two principal arterials crossed, but that's a very different type of interchange, different scale of problem. We were liberal in our definition of what's a freeway. So there are a number of corridors that are being worked on, being invested in, being studied, such as Highway 13 in Scott County. And so we did consider that as a freeway when we looked at, you can see here we included the 35W and Highway 13 interchange. Next slide, please. So then we used performance measures to prioritize locations that we're going to be focused on for solution development. We, of course, had our safety performance measure of crash costs that appropriately weights those fatal and serious injury crashes. We had a mobility measure of delay and a reliability measure that made up the bulk of the scoring for this project, but we also wanted to include special consideration of freight usage and transit usage. So those were also considered in prioritization. Next slide, please. So from that 56 original locations, we narrowed it down to 37 interchanges that had 94 identified problems. The interchanges were really divided into the approaches, and that's why that number exceeds the number of interchanges that were addressed. At this stage, we did also carry forward crossings of two interstates just because of their importance in the region and the state and the nation. Next slide, please. So here's where we took a little deeper look at the specific locations that had been prioritized with the high-level measures. We determined through detailed traffic analysis whether the interchange itself was the bottleneck or that was in another place. In this stage, we also documented a number of locations that were being studied elsewhere to not step on the toes of those more detailed studies, especially given the cursory look that we were going to be able to give it at a regional level. There were 4 locations that were being studied in detail elsewhere. Next slide, please. So in phase 4, we developed those right side solutions. This is just an illustrative list of the type of solutions that we're considering. The focus of the study was definitely on the grade separated larger improvements because of the importance of being able to prioritize those. However, we did not want to preclude solving large problems with small solutions. So we definitely considered 2-lane ramps and collector distributor roads and different at-grade geometric improvements. Next slide, please. So this is just a depiction of the development process, the solution development process. You can see how on the left side is a pencil sketch of a solution, and that was done for at-grade improvements where we really only needed the length and width to estimate quantities and costs. However, some of the more complicated solutions that involve bridges and you can imagine retaining wall and slopes, we did do a more detailed design on those to develop the quantities and costs. Next slide, please. So this is a depiction of the right size solution locations that came out of the study. You can see these are spread throughout the region, serving, I think, all corners of the region. And you can see the different size circles representing the different scale of solutions that were developed and found to be cost effective at those locations. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, can we back up one slide? I'll just highlight one thing. So the orange boxes here are the 4 locations that we're seeing detailed study at the time. And we did not include directly in the study. However, we have thought through how using similar performance measures that those locations could be brought into the lists that result from this study. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in phase 5, we layered on that preservation aspect where bridge and pavement preservation is planned in the region. We did that for a number of reasons. We want to minimize construction costs. We want to minimize traffic impacts to travelers. And then another consideration was just trying to prioritize those lower cost improvements. We want to avoid diminishing returns. We want to preserve the opportunity to spread the benefits throughout the region and tackle as many problems as possible. So the results of the study are not decisions, not a prioritized list, but information, a table with a list of potential improvements, estimated benefits, estimated costs, ties to planned preservation projects. This is information that's going to have to be refined and reconsidered as projects are funded, as environmental documents are completed. So I just want to highlight the nature of the study as really a high-level planning effort and not precluding any of the more detailed project development and environmental process. Next slide. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, this was a joint study between MnDOT and the council, and Paul Morris led the consulting team for the study, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fisher. It was interesting information. Questions for
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner.
Stan Karwoski here. Thank you, Mr. Fisher, for the study. I think it's a good one. For Washington County, we appreciate the study, long-range study going on currently for the 94, 494, 694 interchange. It's so critical to have that future design, even though it's going to take money to get appropriations to do it now. For that one, one's eventually put in, will service for another 50 years. It's really important to get that done is because of the new Bielenberg Bridge and potentially a Forest Street Bridge that are very close by to make sure a new interchange will work with those new bridges and be very compatible with our bus rapid transit goal lines. So I appreciate the investment in the study. It's very significant. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments, questions for Mr. Fisher? Yes, Commissioner Cattell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I did read this whole report. I'm kind of one of those people who really get into this kind of thing. One of the things I appreciated out of the report was the fact that they were looking at the possibility of what happens when you do a fix and does it push it down into another place. When we fix the I-35W interchange at Crosstown, we now have more points of congestion. I'm sure Mayor Hovland understands this. We both talk about that from time to time. That really matters. So do we just push the problem someplace else down the loop? So I appreciate that piece of it. I wanted to know if we could just talk a little bit more. There was talked about they used criteria. Could you talk about that criteria just a little bit? Because we have criteria for stuff. I'd like to see where it overlaps. One of the specific things is there any criteria for equity in any of the analysis that you did? Thank you.
Thank you, Member and Mr. Chair. So the criteria we used, this was centered around congestion. So we used a delay measure. So it was a vehicle hours of delay measure. We also looked at travel time reliability. I believe that was a travel time index. So it's a ratio of the 95th percentile travel time to the 50th percentile travel time. So just understanding how variable that congestion can be. I mentioned the crash measure was really a count of crashes, but weighted for the severity, and it results in a dollar value, a crash cost figure. For freight, we measured, we considered a number of measures, freight percentage, freight usage, and we landed on simply HC-ADT is something that was available across the region and represented the need of the freight community. And then with transit, we used we had ridership numbers, so we had passenger ridership. We did not directly tackle equity in this study. This was meant to be a high-level regional study, very technical in nature. It's a very important point, but unfortunately, it hasn't been addressed yet.
Commissioner, any follow-on? Commissioner Cattell?
I just think that there would be a way to look at equity and just looking at where some of these intersections are and pockets of poverty, severe poverty. And of course, the MIC Council has all that. So, I mean, that's just a layover. That might be something to look at these kinds of tests in the future.
Good thought. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask Mr. Fisher a comment regarding his study. Mr. Fisher, in the 94-694 interchange, as an example, and there's other roads where we are finding Wisconsin, the expansion of growth in Wisconsin, Hudson area as an example, St. Croix County, it's adding a lot of traffic volume. And we have found that a lot of times it's not factored into the evaluation for the need. So how much are you factoring in those traffic volumes from Wisconsin?
Mr. Fisher.
Karen, we do have a regional tool that develops our forecasts, and that does consider the neighboring counties in Wisconsin. This study itself was really centered around current problems, so current usage, current transit usage, current crashes, current congestion. It really didn't recognize that growth. We are a region that's growing by 700,000 people in the next 20 years, and we are definitely going to face that in some big ways.
Yeah, because Highway 36 is another corridor that we're finding.
Sure, did you finish your thought? You jumped over to mute.
I'm sorry, I was just saying another corridor, Highway 36 and eventually 36 and 694 would be a study area, I think I read. But anyhow, Highway 36 were experienced 25% more growth from just 2 years ago due to the new river crossing bridge, combined with another 25% on top of that with just growth, not only in Minnesota, but in Wisconsin. So I think if you could factor in, maybe you're not doing it now, but eventually if we could factor in those traffic patterns from not only our counties, but other states would be very beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's a few other folks.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Member Narayanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fisher, I was just wondering, where the impetus for the study came in the first place, and kind of relates to Commissioner Goodell's points about equity. It seems like the study is oriented mostly towards looking at, traffic volumes and congestion mitigation and delay. But I was also wondering if there were similar studies in place to think specifically about the needs of transit users, pedestrians, bikers across the region as well, because as we've seen over and over, these are vulnerable users who have greater vulnerability to traffic crashes, especially to being hit by cars. And, I was just kind of weighting one versus the other, or if we just haven't had the opportunity to see other studies like this in progress.
Chair and member, that's a very good point. This study was, it took a bite-sized problem and tackled that. There are definitely, I think it was mentioned earlier, the Network Next study is tackling the future transit needs in the region. There are also bike studies. The bike barriers study really tried to look at the barriers that are inhibiting using bicycles as transportation in our region. We have the Regional Bicycle Transportation Network that really tries to set us up for success in terms of, being able to commute across city and county boundaries. So I think we do tackle different things in different studies. This was focused on the highways.
Okay. Mr. Dugan, Member Dugan had his microphone off. I don't know if he wanted to speak or not.
No, sir. No, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner McGuire?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just appreciate my colleagues' questions on 36, of course, and with Commissioner Gotel's on equity and just all of the questions. I'm wondering how often this study is done. I'm reading through it quickly to see if you know, how often do you do this high level study, and when, if we see things that should be added or should be overlaid, when would that happen next?
Member and Chair, that's a very good question. When we looked for examples of this study being done nationally, we really couldn't find one that looked a lot like this. But I think that when this study might be refreshed, done again, really is going to depend on how many projects are delivered, how fast our highway system is changing with growth. So it's hard to predict when this study might be refreshed. I do think it is set up that we could do the performance measures, the technical part, we could refresh that without too much trouble, maybe with staff efforts even, short of a full-blown study.
And I would say that I agree with Commissioner Gotell that you could overlay an equity lens on much of this study too, I would think. So I know you're thinking about looking at that, but I think that would be good as well.
Yeah, Chair and members, I think with the new tools we have to understand, you know, where travelers are coming from and going to, we probably have that opportunity now that we didn't have in the past.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments by tab members?
Mr. Chair, Member Sanger has a question.
All right, Member Sanger. Member Sanger, if you can't get off mute, you could type your question into the chat. I don't know what that little triangular symbol up in the corner of her box means, but it might mean some kind of
it's a low bandwidth signal.
Connection. Low bandwidth, Greg? Is that
Yeah.
what that is? No.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, could she call in? Could she?
She could, Elaine can send her the call-in information. Okay.
I'll send it to her, but if anything, if she could, oh, she's typed in the question.
Oh, yeah. Geez, what are the next steps for implementation? Did you see that, Mr. Fisher?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Really, the next steps are really going to, especially with COVID impacts to transportation funding, I think there's just a lot of uncertainty around that. These aren't the type of projects that would come in through the solicitation because of the prohibition on freeway projects. These are more the type of projects that would be proposed by MnDOT as they develop preservation projects, by council staff as we see opportunities, and be proposed in the TVB updates. Thanks.
Okay. Member Sanger, if you type fast and have a follow-up, send it in. Okay. All right. I think, thanks, Mr. Fisher, for being here with us.
Thank you, Chair.
And providing us that information on the freeway system interchange study. And Sue Sanger saying thanks. I think we all saw that.
I'm sitting in for Mr.
Hey. All right. Now we're going to move on to something that we've been talking about for a couple of months, and that is the COVID survey. I think it was in process the last time we chatted. So we've got the TBI work here and the results of the COVID survey to discuss. And Jonathan Ehrlich and Ashley Asmus are here to discuss that with us.
Hi, Chair Hovland, and this is Ashley Asmus, data scientist at the Metropolitan Council. Greg, were you able to allow me to control the screen here?
Yeah, try it and see. I think you can do it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh.
Good.
One second while I get set up. Oh, here. Okay, I can ask for control.
Okay, you should be good now.
Okay, great. Yeah, I thought this would be helpful. Okay, so I'm really excited to share with you some of our first findings from this COVID-19 outbreak transportation survey. This was conducted in May 2020, and it's the first of 3 waves that we're going to be doing of this same survey. So we're going to be doing 2 more follow-ups of this survey. We were motivated to do this survey for a variety of reasons. Of course, we were seeing rapid changes to travel behavior and to traffic volumes. We were interested in whether certain behavior changes might become permanent, like around teleworking, online shopping, or delivery services. And we were also observing disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on the health and the economy of communities of color and low-income households. So we wanted to know whether these communities were weathering, in a transportation sense, weathering the changes of COVID-19 in the same way. We were interested in equity of access to parks, recreation, and trails, changes to revenue sources, as was just mentioned, from the motor vehicle sales tax and also from transit fares. And folks at Metro Transit wanted to ask questions on the survey about different policies that they were considering that might protect the health of riders and make them feel safe riding on board transit. Our survey sample was restricted to, this was so that we could do the survey as quickly as possible. It was restricted to all metro area adults who'd already participated in our 2019 travel behavior inventory survey. So that's the survey that I've presented on here before. And also restricted to people who provided an email address so we could get in touch with them right away and who agreed to be recontacted. Happily, that was a really pretty large sample. 8,800 adults were eligible for the survey. We got a pretty good response rate and 3,200 responses came back to us. We weighted all of those individual responses to better reflect the regional population. We do this with our TBI survey as well. We weight by race, age, income, and household size so that any underrepresented group, their responses count a little towards more in the total numbers that you'll see. And throughout this presentation, I'll just be presenting the weighted numbers, except in a couple of cases that I've marked with an asterisk. We conducted the survey, or it was open for people to respond between May 14th and May 22nd. We just received the data on June 9th, so this is the first cut that you're seeing here.
Fantastic.
So just to put things in context, I think a lot of you have seen this sort of graph before. This is some of the work that we're doing around measuring traffic declines in the metro area. The survey time, or the time that the survey was open, is shaded in that light blue rectangle over there. I wonder if you can even see my mouse. So it's in light blue here. At that point, metro area freeway volumes were down about 40 or 50% off of normal. And so it was, higher than where it had been in its lowest point in late March, early April, but it was still much lower than normal. We also conducted the survey just at the time, this wasn't by planning it, but just at the time when the stay-at-home order expired and the new stay safe order started to take effect. I'll mention here also that most of our questions were asking people to look back on the previous week. So we're actually looking at, for the most part, travel behavior changes that happened before the stay-home order expired. We asked a lot of questions. We asked for a lot of feedback from folks at MTS, from folks at Metro Transit to get questions that we could include on the survey. And so we've asked questions around work and employment, around grocery shopping, telehealth visits even, how people are perceiving COVID-19. The data that I'm going to show in this survey, it's mostly focused around employment and teleworking, but I'll give you a little taste of some of the other topics at the end. And I've got a full list of topics at the end of the presentation. The great thing about having this survey sample draw from our 2019 travel behavior inventory group is that all of their responses can be linked back to that original survey. So in some cases, we can look at these before and after kind of periods. What were you doing in 2019? What are you doing now? I'm going to start here because I think this sort of puts things in context. We asked people what their perceptions of their own health risk to COVID-19 or the public health risk due to COVID-19 were. And the red bars over there in the right are showing you the proportion of people who said that COVID-19 was a major threat to public health, the health of the US population, their own health, or the health of others in their household. And the take home here, I think, is that the vast majority of people in our survey see COVID-19 as a threat to public health or to their own threat. More people see it as a major threat to public health than to their own, which is a trend that we see nationally as well. We actually borrowed this question from a Pew Research Center survey, which is kind of cool because now we can compare these responses to data that we're seeing nationally. We asked people whether they had tested for COVID-19. This will be an interesting number to track, especially as we benchmark people's travel behavior changes against their direct experiences with the virus. But at the time of this survey, 2% of respondents had tested for COVID-19, and a lot less than 1% had tested positive. 10% though, regardless of whether they had been tested for the virus at all, believed that they had previously had COVID-19. So this might reflect some people who had COVID-19 like symptoms earlier in the year, but they weren't able to get tested for it. It could be people who just think that they've had it for whatever reason. This will be an interesting number to track as well, because it's, I think people are hearing that if you've previously had COVID, you might be invulnerable to becoming infected again. Okay,
Right.
I'm gonna move on here.
I mean, that's what one of the things that happened. Yeah.
One of the transitions was.
Mary, you're not on mute.
Oh, that's okay. I was just making sure it wasn't a question. Oh, and actually, I'll just pause here and also say that we disaggregated these responses by race as well. I don't have the slide here. I'll be presenting it at Transportation Committee. But we're seeing that Black adults, Latinx adults, and Asian adults all perceive COVID-19 to be a greater threat to their own health or to public health relative to white adults. So that is another one that we'll be tracking through time. Okay, so next I'm going to start to switch gears and start talking about employment. And what I want to do first is kind of put our employment and unemployment numbers in context, because like all the other stories I'm going to tell you about sort of have these numbers in them. So I want to say upfront that we're finding in our survey about a 15% unemployment rate for late May. This is higher than what we're getting from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In April, they estimated unemployment around 9.2%. Our unemployment rate counts workers who are permanently unemployed and those who are furloughed. We asked people about their furlough status, and the vast majority said that they were furloughed without pay. However, our 15% number is a lot lower than what's being estimated by the Metropolitan Council Community Development Research Team. So I've got a link here in the slide to the fantastic research that's coming out of that team. They're sort of modeling unemployment based on unemployment filings at the state level. And they're also able to look in a really fine-grained way at unemployment by race and by income. So that 25%, our 15% rather, is probably a floor and not a ceiling on what actual unemployment is in the area. I've disaggregated the unemployment numbers that we found in our survey by income here. So the unemployment in the red and the white bars is that's the unemployed or furloughed category. And we asked people about their income in 2019. So what was your previous income last year? So workers in households that were making less money to start with were also much more likely to become unemployed here. And we're seeing unemployment up to about 45% in households making less than $25,000 a year. But again, this is an underestimate. We disaggregated our data by race as well and found slightly higher unemployment around workers of color. The Met Council research is finding just really staggering disparities. they have found that 23% of white workers are unemployed and are estimating that unemployment among Black workers is 38%, 47% among Indigenous workers. So this is really, this crisis is really hitting different parts of our community differently. There we go. Woohoo. Okay, there we go. All right. So we also asked about changes to employment beyond layoffs. I'll just call your attention to the number in the middle, the hours reduced bar. We're seeing that a lot of people, in addition to becoming unemployed, are also just seeing their hours reduced or their pay cut, and that those changes are hitting lower income workers especially hard, with 19% of workers in households making less than $50,000 a year seeing their hours reduced. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears here and start talking about the transportation impacts of all of these changes to employment. And this is a really, it's kind of a complex figure that's going to answer a really simple question. How has your work commute changed? And we're looking at different modes. So are people driving to work, taking transit, walking, or rolling using a mobility device like a wheelchair, biking to work, or teleworking? So that's going to be in here as well. And then I'll also show you bars for unemployment or unemployment status. And I'm going to disaggregate this by income, just really broad income categories, starting with households that make more than $50,000 a year, so workers in higher income households. Before the outbreak, workers in higher income households mostly drove to work, about 83%, 6% took transit, 5% teleworked, and there was about 2% unemployment. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the same bar, but for during the COVID-19 outbreak, or for late May. So in May 2020, now we're seeing 54% of these workers teleworking, which is just huge, right? 33% continue to drive, and 10% unemployment, which again is sort of a concerning number, right? Now I want to show you who is doing the teleworking, who is doing the driving, and who's become unemployed. And I'm going to do that with sort of a flow diagram. So you're just going to read this from left to right, as if water was flowing down a river, but the river's flowing left to right on your screen. Okay, so we'll start with people who used to drive. About a third of them are still driving to work. About a third, actually more than a third, are teleworking now. And then a handful more are unemployed, or are unemployed and now just out of the labor force, not looking for work. People who were unemployed before continue to be unemployed, so that's the gray line down here at the bottom, although a handful have found jobs and are now taking a variety of modes to work. People who teleworked before are, no surprise, teleworking now. People who took transit before are, for the most part, teleworking, although a few continue to take transit or bike or drive to work now. And then we also have numbers for those who used to bike and walk to work, and smaller sample there, but you can see where everybody ended up all over the place. Okay, so that was for higher income households. Now let me show you the same story, but for workers in lower income households. So I'll start with before the outbreak. Before the outbreak, workers in lower income households, mostly drove, but at lower rates. So at 64% drove. We saw 12% unemployment, 10% took public transit, and 5% teleworked. That 5% number, incidentally, it's the same number as the households making more than $50,000 a year. Okay, now what happened after the outbreak? Okay, we see unemployment grows to 34%. Only 24% are now teleworking, and about a third are driving. The vast majority of the people who were unemployed before are still unemployed now, although actually a surprising number of people moved from not looking to work to entering the workforce before and after. We see those who were teleworking before are teleworking now. Those who used to take transit, split roughly 4 ways, with about a quarter being now newly unemployed, about a quarter teleworking, a quarter still taking transit, and a handful of people driving now. And then here's the driving modes, which break down sort of similarly to what you might expect from the lower or the higher income household, got a third still driving, a third teleworking, and a third unemployed. So now when we look across all income categories, only 11% of workers continue to take transit to work. So that's where a big number or a big reduction in ridership is coming from here.
Can I ask a quick question? This is Commissioner Gotel.
Yes, Commissioner.
First of all, this is fascinating. I want to thank you for this great report and all this information and everything. You know, as we're moving forward, this is probably going to be very impactful. So in this data, do we know how many people are absolutely transit dependent and don't own a car, and so they lost their job because of that?
Oh, that's such a good question. Chair Hovland and Commissioner Gotel. Yeah, so we have information on whether they owned a car from our 2019 survey. We could presume that or make a guess that the majority of people who didn't own a car in 2019 still don't own a car in 2020, and look at that. That's a great idea. A sticky note here. Okay. I'll keep on moving then. Okay, so looking across all incomes relative to pre-outbreak conditions and including those who are newly unemployed, the number of car commuters shrank by 58%, the number of bike commuters shrank by 2/3, the number of transit commuters shrank by 85%, and the number of teleworkers increased 8 times, 800%. And so now I want to talk a little bit about teleworking. We asked a lot of questions around telework because we were really interested in it. We started by asking people how often they teleworked before COVID-19. And about 12% of people said that they teleworked or worked from home about 5 days a week. And this includes the self-employed, maybe you run a home daycare or something like that. 44% of people said that they never teleworked. They only worked in an office. And there are a handful of other folks working, 1 or 2 days a week. And we see 5% unemployment here. Okay, in May 2020, the story is, as you'd expect from the previous slides I've shown you, we got 48% working from home 5 days a week all the time, 10% working from home part-time, 23% still not working, and 16% unemployment. This number shifts around a little bit because the subsample of people who answer each question varies, but so it's 15% before, it's 16 here, take my word. But now I'm going to show you the same thing, show you where these folks ended up, because I think we're really curious about these people who never teleworked before, right? Well, first of all, who's unemployed? The people most likely to become unemployed were those who were not teleworking before, who had no capacity to telework. You were a lot less likely to become unemployed if you teleworked even occasionally, less than weekly. So that probably matches what you might expect. Now, who's teleworking all the time? Look at this dark gray bar here. There's a huge number of people who never teleworked before who are now teleworking 5 days a week. That's a huge culture change for people. So we're really interested in what this is going to look like in the future. And then I'll show you the other transitions here too. It's a little more muddled, but we see that still, the people who are not teleworking now are the people who weren't teleworking before. Okay, so we asked just a subset of these people, if you were currently teleworking, how often you would like to telework in the future. The majority of people ended up in kind of this like happy spot, 2 to 5 days a week, which is a lot more teleworking than was previously happening before the outbreak. And we've got most people saying that they want to telework the same amount or more. Very few people saying they want to telework less or never. And finally, we asked people, employees, what they thought their employer would think. Is your employer very likely, somewhat likely, or not at all likely to support future telework? And the majority said that their employer would be very likely or somewhat likely to support continued telework, with the match between these categories kind of falling out all over the place. I'll throw them up here, but it's sort of a spaghetti mess. But probably if you just step back from this picture, you can kind of see where we're thinking about estimating teleworking rates in the future, right? You start with the people whose employers are very likely to continue to support telework, those who are working from home, who want to continue working from home a lot, and those who are already working from home, right? These people are very likely to continue teleworking into the future. And I'll pause here again and say we have a slide of this broken down by race for the Transportation Committee meeting next week. And I'd encourage you to look at that. The story is very different for Black workers than it is for white workers in particular. We're seeing growth in teleworking for white workers, for Latinx workers, and for Asian workers, but not for Black workers in our region. And actually, I'll pause there and ask, is it okay if I continue? I know that we're moving over time. There's a few more slides here, or I could.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead, Ashley.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to switch gears here and talk instead about employment and commuting, talk a little bit about some of the other nuggets from our survey. We asked a lot of questions around outdoor recreation. Our survey was going out, actually, I forget the exact timing, but I know that that Safe Streets initiative or where they were widening some of the roadways in Minneapolis and St. Paul was starting to happen. So we were curious about whether people were using those. Interestingly, we found that 11% of adults, which is a higher number than I would have expected, had recently used these widened streets. We asked a question about that. Most people, or 45% of people, said that they'd recently used a park or a trail for recreation or exercise. We're also just across the board seeing really increased rates of outdoor exercise and recreation. So that's this bar graph here on the right. And this is where we struck, or we're just really fortunate to have such detailed 7-day data from the travel behavior inventory in 2019, because we're able to directly compare people's responses from May 2020 to what they actually did in 7 days in the summertime in 2019. So this is restricted just to the people who did the TBI in the summertime and who completed a week-long travel behavior diary. But went from 28% of people saying they exercised or used the outdoors for recreation 28% of the time to 68% of people saying that they did that most days. It's a huge growth. Okay. Well, finally, this is close to home for me because I order takeout all the time now. But here I wanted to show you some statistics around home delivery and online shopping. And again, this is looking backwards at participants who did a 6 or a 7-day travel behavior inventory survey in 2019. So just a subset of our whole sample, but still pretty robust. So in 2019, 10% of people said that they had delivery of non-food items 1 or 2 times that week. Now that number is 19%. So a lot more people shopping online. We prompted people to think of Amazon, Target, Walmart, or other local retailers. In 2019, we had 15% of people saying that they got delivery of some kind of food, whether that was groceries or takeout, most days of the week. That number is now 23%, so you can put me in that category. But there's even a huge growth in the number of people who are doing it just 1 or 2 days a week. So more people are getting delivery of food and groceries. In 2019, we didn't ask people to distinguish between takeout and grocery delivery, which how could we have known that? But in this year, we did ask them to distinguish between those two. And so just looking at who's had groceries delivered in the last 7 days, 16% of all adults had some sort of grocery delivery in the last week. Those numbers are lower for lower income adults and for Black or African American adults, but it's higher for adults with disabilities. And comparing back to 2019, we see a similar growth in just the amount of food delivery for adults with disabilities. And finally, we've got numbers here for those who shopped online. So you might shop online but not buy anything that day or have anything delivered that day. And we're seeing growth in the number of people shopping online as well. So I mentioned at the top that we were interested in changes to revenue around car purchases and the motor vehicle sales tax. 9% of people said that they were likely, or at least somewhat likely, to buy a new or used car from a dealer in the next 6 months. And that would come out to an estimate of 193,000 people in the region. For comparison, 250,000 cars are sold statewide in Minnesota in 2018. We're not really sure how to benchmark this number yet, We're going to do some additional research and figure out if we can get a good number to benchmark this against. But at least moving forward, we'll have this 9%. We can see how it changes over time and do some more digging and figure out how closely related employment changes are to your likelihood of a car purchase in the future. The same number said that they wanted to buy a new bike in the next 6 months. So this is another one we really want to benchmark. We've been asking around to find out how many bikes are sold in the metro area. If anyone knows the number, let me know. 5% saying they might buy a transit pass. Okay, and finally, I wanted to show you some questions around attitudes riding transit. This slide is called Feeling Safe on Board Public Transit. We know that wearing masks, or I guess we now know that wearing masks and staying socially distant on board transit, it makes transit a fairly safe experience. Of course, not everything's 100%, but fairly safe. And here we wanted to ask people what makes them feel safe on board, right? And so the question is, if we did X measure, like, would that make you likely to ride transit? And we just asked this to transit riders. That was 825 respondents in the survey. The survey went out just as Metro Transit was requiring face masks, just before or just after. So we asked, like, if masks were mandatory, would you be more likely to ride transit? But of course, the answer is masks are mandatory. Luckily, we found that mandatory mask wearing is one of the most favorable policies, making about 60% of people likely or very likely or somewhat likely to ride transit. Everything else is kind of in the margins, so we're seeing other measures being slightly less popular. Interestingly, the rear door boarding measure was the least popular or the least likely to make people likely to ride transit. Yeah, that was a good one to know, given that Metro Transit was considering moving back to front door boarding for fare collection. But all of these measures, I think, we've been talking among our research group that reductions in commuting and reductions in travel, those might have a much higher or much larger effect on ridership than these safety policies, although they are important, and it's really great that we have some feedback about how people are feeling about them. Here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so just a reminder that this is the first of 3 mini waves of this survey that we'll be conducting. The exact timing is to be decided, but sometime in the fall or late summer, and then sometime in the fall or winter. And we'll be recruiting from this pool of people as well as our larger TBI pool to hope to get some greater representation among underrepresented groups in our survey. Our 2021 TBI is also scheduled. So this is our regular travel behavior inventory survey that we've moved to an every other year schedule. And that will include 3,700 households, about 7,000 people. And we'll no doubt include some of these questions in that survey as well. It's just a matter of which ones and how we can keep the burden of completing the survey low for people. Okay, we've got a whole list of topics here, but I won't read through them right now. I'm looking for, if you have any questions you'd like to ask me now, or you're welcome to email me later. If there are survey topics that are of most urgent concern for you, if there are findings that requires a deeper exploration or an explanation, and if there are any aspects of life or transportation under COVID-19 that demand further study.
All right, good, thank you. Member Geisler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I'd have, Ashley, is there some level of, specifically for those who are saying they're unemployed and seeking or furloughed and maybe seeking alternative employment, are there any questions around, has transportation availability played a role in your ability to obtain or hold a job?
Oh, that's, thank you, Member Geisler and Chair. We asked a question. We did not ask that specific question, but we did ask the question, has a lack of transportation in the last week, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, has a lack of transportation in the last week affected your ability to have your needs met? So sort of general, like, transportation barriers question. the number of people who answered yes to that particular question was pretty small. I think it was 2 or 3%. But we can look into that more and see how that relates to employment status.
Yeah, it's specifically what I'm interested in is, as folks start looking for employment that may be further afield, transportation becomes more critical to their ability to obtain employment.
Yeah.
So if they were able to walk to work before, but now they have to take the bus, if they were able to take the bus, but now they have to get a car because it's away from the bus routes, what is the role that transportation is impacting people's ability to get back to work? If that work is available.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me think on that one, and I'll try to get some more information for you.
Thank you. Others? Mayor Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ashley, this is really excellent information that's going to help us so much as we move forward. And I was curious, as I looked at the increased frequency, that was kind of at a higher level, just like wearing masks and sanitization, if I believe that was correct from your slide. And so on the lines that you surveyed people, was that increased frequency due to more buses? How was there increased frequency?
Oh, let me make sure I understand. So the question was, would increased frequency make you more likely
would increase frequency? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, because I couldn't remember what the slide was, but I just noted that it was increased frequency, and it was something that people responded to in a positive way. So
Yeah,
it was just if it was.
Right.
Not that it was. Not that it actually was increased. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Mayor Mary, I think that if you look at like the way people view the ABRT lines, they like that sort of routine frequency. You know, if you wait for 10 more minutes, another bus is going to come, and we consistently get very high feedback on that, which in this survey differs from like what we've been doing, where we're increasing frequency right now in some areas to address COVID, which is an operational difference. Yeah.
Well, and to me, it's a more reliable system when it's like that. So thank you for that information.
All right, good. Thank you. Other questions for Ashley? Elaine, would you, I know that we had this as part of our agenda that was mailed out electronically. Would you mail the link or email the study directly to everybody on the tab? I think particularly for the elected officials, this may have value in the work they're doing with their colleagues on either a county board or a city council. So we should get it, I think, sent directly to us so that it's easier to download and move around the system.
I will send it along with, I'll send it along with the links that were provided by Todd Bewin.
All right. Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else for Ashley? Ashley, thanks. That was some very fascinating work. Yes.
Sure. One quick question for Ashley, and I second the thought that this was very useful information. Is there any plans to develop out a data set that captures what employers are planning to do? So the one question you had in there was provocative about their attitude, but I thought it would be interesting to know, what do you really plan to do with your workforce, and at what level of your workforce are you thinking of changing things? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We are not planning to survey employers. I know that there are some, there's at least one proposed study at MnDOT that may or may not get funded to like sort of ask employers what they are thinking. Yeah, Jonathan, do you remember? I've got you right as you're getting go.
We do not have plans to survey employers at this time. And you're correct. There's a proposed study which I think has been funded or has highlighted being funded by MnDOT through the University of Minnesota
the follow-up for the Uber seem to be looking at that. I don't know what the status of that is, but I believe that's the plan at this point. But we're not going to be doing that work.
All right, good. Thanks, Jonathan. All right, anybody else? Well, thanks, Ashley, in particular, Mr. Ehrlich, thanks for being here as well. And that'll conclude that portion of the agenda. So on to items of tab members. Does anybody on the tab have an item they wish to address with tab membership?
Mr. Chairman, this is Carl Crimmins from MAC.
Yes, Carl.
Yeah, I want to correct something. I misspoke earlier. In May of 2019, we had 544 flights a day. So we're going to be at, I think I said 300 and something, but it's 544. We're going to be 40% of that at 230 come July and early August. So I just wanted to correct that.
Sure, and at about 65% occupancy, it sounds like.
Yes, sir.
All right, good. Yeah, thank you. That's interesting information too. All right, and one thing I forgot to mention was we had an inquiry from Steve Peterson about a project between Hennepin County and I think it was Brooklyn Center. They've had one extension. Elaine, you might explain the general rule that's in play here, and I just want to let the tab members know that this will be coming to us for some consideration of a variation on the general rule, or maybe some technical recommendations on a potential variation of the general rule. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. This is Elaine Koutsoukos. What we discussed at tab executive is we received a request from MnDOT to consider allowing them to send in a request for a program year extension on 3 projects that we funded through the regional solicitation that are connected with the Corridors of Commerce project. In early 2019, I believe TAB approved a 2-year, we called a program year shift, because it was typically a program year extension as 1 year. And because they were tied with the Corridors of Commerce projects, we wanted them to be concurrent. And so that was approved by TAB. Well, now MnDOT is going out and preparing an environmental impact statement for these projects, which is going to delay the projects another 2 years. And they were asking for permission to submit a request for another program year extension for additional 2 years. And since this is outside of our general policy, or TAB's policy, for only 1 year and one-time request, and then this is extenuating circumstances for this project, TAB executive discussed allowing them to submit this through the committee process for review by the technical committees. I mean, we would also have to find out if have TAB discuss, along with the policy, should there be some changes to that policy to allow for extenuating circumstances.
All right. So that's going to be coming to general direction of the TAB here relatively soon. We don't have to have a decision on it until the end of the year. But I think Elaine framed it well. It's just, we have a general rule about one-time extensions. Might there be circumstances where we would have an exception to the rule and say under extraordinary circumstances, you can have another extension? And here's what extraordinary circumstances means. And we start to try to define that. So we've got a rule framed up with exceptions and are not just taking these as a one-off situation every time they come up. Although we've done that in the past too, frankly. So that's coming our way. So that was all I had that I had forgotten to mention before. Did that prompt any further thoughts from any other TAB members on anything they wanted to cover with the TAB at large?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Commissioner?
Yeah, I just wanted to, earlier in the consent agenda, we talked about Highway 10, and I want to thank everyone for supporting that, that modification for the right-of-way. As folks know, that's phase 2 of the Highway 10 work that we're doing out here, which is essentially changing the expressway removing stoplights and making it a highway going all the way through. Phase 3 is in the city of Ramsey, and that's Sunfish and Ramsey Boulevard, Sunfish Lake Boulevard and Ramsey Boulevard, which is the third and final phase of the Highway 10 project. I just wanted to announce to the group that we're, just beyond grateful and certainly very happy to receive a $40 million infra grant for phase 3, for the phase 3 project. And Congressman Emmer had just announced that infra grant as of yesterday, I believe. But due to his work and the submittals sent out by Anoka County and the importance of the project, we were fortunate enough to land that $40 million infra grant. We're going before the state in special session here to see if we can secure additional funding for this project. But it's moving right along. I know that TAB has contributed money to the phase 2 project in terms of the grade separated interchanges. And we're moving right along with the dollars for phase 3 here. It's the $40 million infra grant's about a 30% downstroke on the project, which is significant. And it certainly builds momentum as we are finding other sources too. So just want to share that with the group, and we're moving along, so we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, thanks for that update. That's good to know. You've got some good work going on up there.
Thank you.
All right, folks. I think that's it. I don't think there's any other business that we want to cover, Elaine, unless you have something else you want to cover with the group.
No, that is all I have. Just have a nice time off in July.
Oh, there you go. I agree. Well, we'll see you all in August. It is 2:31. Thanks for your patience, and see you soon.
Be well. Good to see you all.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Jim.
Meeting.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Great to see you all.
Yeah, I agree. Good to see everybody.